The quiet man in seat 1/8 airport was buzzing with impatient footsteps, rushed goodbyes, and loud announcements echoing off the walls. It was just another morning for most travelers, but for one quiet man dressed in a simple black hoodie and worn-out jeans, today would change everything. He sat alone at gate B-17, his head slightly bowed, eyes hidden behind a pair of scratched sunglasses. No entourage, no assistant, not even a bodyguard. He looked like a man trying to disappear, and yet he was the reason half the passengers kept glancing over, whispering and nudging each other. Because the quiet man wasn't just anyone. He was Keanu Reeves, Hollywood star, action hero, internet's favorite humble soul. But here, waiting to board a flight from Los Angeles to New York, he wasn't being treated like a celebrity, was just another passenger. And soon, something was going to test the patience and kindness he was known for. When the boarding call came for first class, Keanu quietly rose from his seat. His boarding pass read, Seat 1A. As he approached the gate, the airline staff scanned his pass but then hesitated. A stern-looking manager walked up and leaned in close, speaking in a low voice. "Mr. Reeves, there seems to be a booking error. We're going to have to reassign your seat." Keanu blinked, then nodded gently. "It's all right. Where do you need me to sit?" "We'll move you to economy. It's the only seat left." For a second, even the employees paused, waiting for him to protest. But Keanu simply smiled and said, "No problem, I'll take it." Around him, first-class passengers who'd heard the exchange looked stunned. A few shook their heads in disbelief. Others looked away, embarrassed. Not one person offered their seat back. Not one asked why someone like him, who had quietly paid for the full fare without any demand for special treatment, was being moved like this. As he walked down the jet bridge, the cameras in his pocket remained unused. He didn't post. He didn't tweet. He just lowered his head and took the last seat in the very back row, 36Cs, cramped between a crying baby and a snoring man with headphones that leaked music too loud to ignore. The flight took off. For the first hour, Keanu kept his hands folded in his lap. The baby beside him reached for his fingers, and instead of flinching, he let the tiny hand hold on. The young mother, clearly overwhelmed, looked at him with wide eyes. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, nearly in tears. "He hasn't stopped crying since this morning." Keanu offered a soft smile. "He just wants to be heard. Babies are better at honesty than we are." She stared for a moment, realizing who he was, and when he reached into his carry-on to offer a small wooden toy, hand-carved, clearly worn, the child immediately calmed. The mother's tears came not from stress now, but relief. In first class, champagne was being poured. Hot towels were passed around. Polite laughter filled the cabin. But none of those people knew that in seat 36C, a man worth millions was giving comfort to strangers without needing a single thank you. Somewhere over Kansas, turbulence hit. Not the small bumps that made people shift in their seats, but the kind that rattled cups, dropped phones, and brought a wave of gasps across the plane. Passengers in first class clutched their drinks. In economy, people grabbed the armrests. The young mother cried out as her bag flew from under her seat. Keanu, still calm, reached across and steadied her child. His voice, steady but gentle, was the first sound that cut through the panic. "We're all right. It's just wind." The baby whimpered but didn't cry. The mother exhaled shakily. "How are you so calm?" she asked. He looked out the window, then back at her. "Life has shaken me harder than this." When the turbulence finally passed, the flight attendants resumed their duties. Whispers spread down the aisles as people finally confirmed who he was. A teenage boy leaned over the seat and asked, "You're Keanu Reeves, right?" Keanu gave a small nod. The boy's eyes lit up. "You're like my hero." "Heroes are the ones who help others when no one's watching," Keanu said, glancing toward the crying baby now asleep in his mother's arms. "I just play them in movies." The boy didn't know what to say. But that moment, that sentence, would later be quoted by millions. As the plane began to descend into New York, something unusual happened. The pilot made an announcement, asking all passengers to remain seated due to a delay at the gate. The plane would be stuck on the tarmac for a while. People groaned. Tempers flared, but Keanu simply stood and offered his seat to the elderly man across the aisle, whose legs had been cramping. "Take mine," he said. "I'll stand." The flight attendants told him he wasn't allowed to stand during taxiing. He sat back down quietly. What no one knew yet was that the airline system had flagged the seating change, the one that moved Keanu from first class to economy. It wasn't a simple error. It was a deliberate swap made to prioritize a high-paying executive client who had pulled influence at the last moment. And that executive? He worked for a tech firm with a massive contract pending with the airline's parent company. Keanu never mentioned it, never complained, but someone else noticed. A teenage girl seated nearby had been live-streaming parts of the flight for her followers. When she quietly filmed the moment Keanu was moved, and then the way he treated people in economy, her clip went viral before the plane even landed. And that clip? It was about to hit 10 million views by the time they reached the gate. When the doors finally opened and passengers began to disembark, most rushed out. Keanu helped the young mother gather her things. She hugged him tightly and said, "Thank you for everything." He simply nodded, but as he stepped off the plane, a group of airport staff were waiting near the jet bridge, not to welcome him, but to pull him aside. "Mr. Reeves," said the lead agent, "we need to speak to you privately." Keanu frowned, confused. "Did something happen?" The agent didn't answer, just gestured toward the corridor. Behind him, the teenage girl's video continued to spread like wildfire. And in a quiet boardroom, 3 states away, the CEO of the airline was watching it play out in real time. The storm was coming, and it would cost the airline more than they could imagine. Whispers in the boardroom, the room was cold. Not because of the air conditioning, but because of the silence. Thick, uncomfortable, and growing heavier by the second. Across the long glass conference table sat 7 executives, their eyes fixed on the giant screen at the end of the room. The video was still playing, looping a 30-second clip that had already done irreversible damage. In it, Keanu Reeves stood in the economy cabin, gently rocking a crying baby while whispering soft words no one could hear. A woman's voice trembled behind the camera. "He gave up his first-class seat. He didn't even argue." Pause. The CEO said, his voice low and tight. A younger man, barely out of his 20s, clicked the remote. The screen froze on Keanu's face. Calm, slightly tired, but not bitter. The kind of face that said more with silence than most did. With speeches. "This was taken mid-flight?" the CEO asked, though he already knew the answer. "Yes, sir," said the compliance officer. "The girl live-streamed it. It's already been shared by 3 major outlets, and the comments are brutal. People are furious." "Furious?" Another executive scoffed, trying to hide the tremble in his voice. "It's just a seating mistake." The legal officer cleared her throat. "It's not about the seat. It's about what it represents. They didn't move just anyone. They moved Keanu Reeves, a man known for kindness, humility, and now he's the face of our biggest mistake." The CEO didn't move. He leaned back in his chair, eyes drifting to the frozen image on the screen. He'd seen hundreds of scandals in his time, missed flights, delays, even lawsuits. But this wasn't about legality or logistics. This was emotional. People didn't get angry over systems. They got angry over stories, and Keanu had just given them one that would echo for years. "Who authorized the seat change?" he asked flatly. A hush fell again. A junior director shifted uncomfortably. "It came from VIP relations. They bumped. Him for Mr. Rogers." "The cloud system CEO?" the CEO asked, a slow nod. "Yes. We moved Reeves to economy so Rogers could have the aisle seat in first. He threatened to pull his contract if we didn't accommodate him. And how much is that contract worth? Around 400 million, sir. The CEO closed his eyes. We may have just lost it anyway. Meanwhile, back at the airport, Keanu was sitting in a small, private room, sipping lukewarm tea. No, one had told him why he'd been pulled aside. No one had raised their voice, but the tension was clear. A manager, clearly nervous, sat across from him, flipping through pages of an incident report that didn't really apply. Mr. Reeves, she began, struggling to meet his eyes. We want to apologize for what happened on the flight. There was a mistake. Keanu tilted his head slightly, his voice calm. I said it was fine. Yes, but I wasn't mistreated, he said softly. Just moved. People go through worse every day. The woman blinked. She had expected anger, maybe even legal threats. What she got instead was grace, and it made the shame sharper. Outside the room, cameras were already gathering. Reporters, influencers, vloggers. The story was out of control now, and no one could. Stop it! Keanu, sensing the shift, stood up slowly. If there's nothing else. Wait, the woman said. Please, we'd like to offer compensation. A full refund, complimentary flights, access to our VIP program. Keanu gave her a look that wasn't unkind, just tired. I didn't ask for anything, and then he walked out. He didn't stop for cameras, didn't answer questions. He just pulled his hoodie over his head and melted into the crowd like he always did. Quietly. But the world wasn't going to be quiet about this. That night, Respect Keanu trended worldwide. Celebrities began reposting the clip, demanding answers. People who had never flown with the airline promised they never would. And then, something unexpected happened. The CEO of Cloud Systems, the man who'd taken Keanu's seat, released a statement. It was short, blunt, and devastating. I was unaware. The seat was reassigned from Mr. Reeves. Had I known, I would have refused. I have since terminated our contract with the airline, effective immediately. The loss hit the company like a gut punch. 400 million. Gone. And with it, trust from the public that had taken years to build. Inside his apartment, Keanu sat alone watching the headlines scroll across his phone. He didn't smile. Didn't feel vindicated. He only felt tired. He had never wanted to be the center of attention. All he'd wanted was to get from one place to another. Quietly. Like always, a knock came at the door. His assistant entered holding a letter. This came by courier. No name. Just this. Keanu took it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a handwritten note. You didn't speak loudly, but the whole world heard you anyway. Beneath it, no signature. He stared at the words for a long time, and deep inside, something began to stir. Not anger, not pride, but a question. What if this moment, this accidental injustice, was meant for something greater? What if the quiet man in seat 36 Iggy was now holding a voice louder than any movie ever gave him, and what he did with it next would change more than an airline? The man who chose silence. It rained in New York the next morning, not the kind of rain that makes people run for shelter, but the kind that soaks slowly, whispering across windows like it's telling a secret the world forgot to listen to. In a small cafe tucked between towering glass buildings, Keanu Reeves sat by the window, watching droplets race each other down the glass. The world outside was busy. Umbrellas brushed shoulders. Taxi horns cried out in frustration. But inside, everything was still. His coffee had gone cold. He wasn't there for the coffee. A small notebook lay open in front of him. No one knew Keanu still wrote with a pen. He didn't use fancy apps, voice memos, or stylus screens. He wrote, like he acted, with patience, depth, and silence. On the page, a single line stood alone. When the world hands you a microphone you didn't ask for, what do you say? He hadn't answered it yet. He looked up as a man entered the cafe. Rain, clinging to his coat. His name was Theo, one of the few friends Keanu still trusted after all the years in the spotlight. Theo didn't work in movies. He didn't care about box office numbers or red carpets. He was a school teacher, the kind who still mailed handwritten letters to students long after they graduated. "You've caused quite a mess," Theo said gently as he sat down. "Wasn't trying to," Keanu replied. "Doesn't matter. It's yours now. People are listening." Keanu stared out the window again. "That's the problem. I don't want to be a symbol. You already are." Theo took out his phone and held it up. A video was playing. It wasn't the one from the flight. This was newer. Raw footage of strangers at airports holding signs. One said, "Seat 36E matters." Another had a drawing of Keanu handing a toy to a baby, with the words, "Kindness flies farther." Keanu exhaled slowly. "I was just doing what anyone should do." "Maybe. But you did it when no one else did. And now, people are watching to see what you'll do next." Keanu didn't answer. Instead, he flipped to the next page in his notebook and wrote another question. "Can a small act of kindness fix a world addicted to noise?" He closed the book without writing an answer. Later that day, he took the subway. Not a private car, not a limousine. The subway. He sat between an old man with a cane and a young woman balancing 2 grocery bags on her knees. No one noticed him at first. He didn't want them to. But a boy standing across the car stared. He held a school folder tight against his chest. His clothes were torn, his face thin. After a moment, he walked over and stood in front of Keanu. "You're the man from the plane," he said. Keanu looked up. "I'm just someone who flies sometimes." The boy shook his head. "My mom showed me the video. She said you're proof good people still exist." Keanu's eyes softened. "Your mom sounds wise. She is. She's gone now, but she would have liked you." Silence filled the train. Then the boy held out his folder. "I draw stuff for people who do good things." Keanu opened the folder slowly. Inside was a pencil sketch, rough but beautiful, of him holding the baby on the plane, eyes closed. The cabin around him blurred as if kindness itself made everything else fade. "I call it quiet strength," the boy said. Keanu didn't speak. Instead, he folded the drawing carefully and placed it into his bag. When he stepped off the train, he was a different man. Not because he'd been recognized, but because something inside had shifted. The world hadn't handed him a scandal. It had handed him a spark. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to use it. That evening, without warning, Keanu posted a single photo to his rarely used page. It was the boy's drawing, captioned with just 3 words. "Quiet matters more." No hashtags, no promotion, no brand attached, just truth. Within 30 minutes, the internet lit up again. Influencers began sharing stories of flight attendants who'd been kind, of strangers giving up seats for the elderly, of men helping women with strollers off trains. Quiet kindness started trending, but not everyone was happy. Inside the airline's headquarters, executives scrambled to contain the firestorm. They had tried to apologize. They had offered discounts, rewards, and even public statements. None of it worked. Keanu hadn't even named them, yet their stock was sinking, and worse. Someone inside the company had leaked the internal emails. Emails that proved the decision to move Keanu wasn't an error. It was arrogance. The public was not forgiving. Protesters appeared outside terminals. A growing list of celebrities declared they would no longer fly with the company. But Keanu said nothing. Not because he didn't care, but because he was preparing something more powerful than a press conference. In his apartment that night, he sat down with Theo again. In front of them lay a letter. Not to the airline, not to the press, but to the world. And it didn't begin with anger. It began with a story. A story about a boy who had lost his mother, a baby who had cried, a stranger who had watched, and a man who simply chose to act with kindness when no one else did, and what that kindness awakened could no longer be ignored. The letter that didn't shout. The morning began with soft sunlight peeking through gray clouds, the kind of light that feels quiet, even in a city that never truly sleeps. It slipped past the curtains of Keanu's apartment and rested on the corner of his kitchen table, where the letter sat. Handwritten, folded carefully, sealed not with wax or fanfare but with simple tape. Like a message between friends, not a man and the world. Theo watched from across the table. "You sure you want to do it this way?" Keanu nodded slowly. "People are tired of speeches. Tired of being told what to feel. They need something honest. Something small. But everyone's expecting a video or a statement at least. It feels too quiet." Keanu smiled faintly. "That's the point, E." And so the letter went out. Not through a press release, not through marketing teams or influencers. It was posted as a scanned image, shared by one of the students from Theo's school who had followed Keanu since she was little. The caption, simply read, "He asked me to share this." The letter read like a memory. "Dear strangers, I wasn't planning on being a symbol. I don't want to be a headline or a hashtag or someone who accidentally cost anyone millions. I boarded a flight like anyone else. I was moved. I accepted it. But that moment wasn't about me. It was about a choice we all face every day, to be kind, or to look away. I sat in seat 36E and saw more honesty in a crying child's eyes than I've seen in most boardrooms. I saw a mother doing her best, a teenager finding beauty in silence, and a world that, for a second, remembered how powerful it is when someone simply cares. I didn't fix anything. I didn't intend to start anything. But if this moment has reminded you of the quiet good inside you, let that be the change. We don't need louder people. We need better listeners. Thank you for listening. Keanu, the internet broke open, not with outrage, but with something more disarming, humility. People reposted the letter not with angry emojis, but with stories. Stories about their fathers giving their last umbrella to a stranger, about neighbors bringing soup to single mothers, about a girl who helped her classmate walk home every day without ever asking why he limped. For once, kindness had gone viral. It wasn't a trend, it was a mirror, and people began looking into it. News anchors read the letter on air, their voices quieter than usual. Schools printed it on bulletin boards. An airline worker taped it to the break room wall. A bus driver in Toronto said it over the intercom before pulling out into traffic. The world had not heard a shout. It had heard a whisper, and it was listening. Meanwhile, at the headquarters of the airline, the damage was no longer just numbers on a chart. Internal resignations began to stack. Public trust evaporated faster than their crisis team could speak. And worst of all, employees who had once felt invisible began to speak up. A flight attendant anonymously posted that she had been demoted for giving her own first-class meal to a diabetic passenger. A gate agent shared how she'd been threatened with termination for refusing to downgrade a disabled traveler to fit in a higher-paying customer. Now, empowered by Keanu's letter, these stories flooded out, and the airline, it could no longer plug the leaks, but Keanu remained still. He didn't tweet again. He didn't issue demands. Instead, he visited a small community center in Queens, unannounced, where Theo's students met after school. The place was falling. Apart, peeling paint, old computers, a cracked basketball court no one used anymore because the hoop was missing. The kids didn't scream when they saw him. They just stared, until Keanu walked in like an older brother, knelt down beside a kid, drawing on the floor, and asked, "What's your story?" And for the next 2 hours, that's all he did. He listened. He didn't sign autographs. Didn't pose for pictures. He just listened. At the end of the day, he stood with the director of the center, an exhausted woman with eyes that had seen. More hope lost than found. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly. "I know," Keanu replied. "That's why I want to." He left a check, not to impress, not to repair an image, but because he could. The next morning, news broke again, not because Keanu shared it, but because the community center director did, and it wasn't the amount on the check that moved people. It was the note he left behind. Build more chairs. Someone always needs a place to sit. And suddenly, the conversation shifted again, from outrage to action. People started building chairs, metaphorically and literally. A retired carpenter in Maine made benches for his local park. A group of teens in Mexico City started a Seat for Kindness campaign on public buses. A pilot in Germany began his flights by saying, "This cabin is shared space. May we fill it with respect." And all of it traced back to the man who never raised his voice, never called for boycotts, and never blamed. He simply sat in seat 36A and let the world decide what came next. But something deeper was unfolding, something not even Keanu expected. Because someone from his past had seen the letter, someone who hadn't spoken to him in nearly 20 years, and now they were on their way to see him. The voice from yesterday, Keanu, sat at the edge of the rooftop garden, far above the city where the noise never truly stopped. Below, cars blinked in lines like restless stars. The wind carried scents of street food and spring rain. He liked this place. It didn't belong to anyone. The garden was part of an abandoned building still waiting to be turned into another hotel or luxury tower. But for now, it was quiet. Forgotten. It reminded him of himself. He read the letter again. The handwriting was old-fashioned, elegant, and familiar. He hadn't seen it in almost 2 decades, but he knew it instantly. "I saw your letter. And suddenly I remembered the boy who gave away his coat when it was snowing. You haven't changed. I hope that still means something. I'll be in the city tomorrow. I'll wait at the place where we last said goodbye, if you remember it." No signature. But he didn't need one. Her name rose like a whisper from a corner of his memory. Emily. Not a girlfriend, not a co-star, not a fan. She had been something gentler, more sacred. She was the only person who had ever made him believe that kindness wasn't weakness. They had met long before fame, before money, before the world had put his name on posters and faces in theaters. Back when he was just a quiet boy in a city that didn't care if he existed. Emily was the only one who noticed he did. They were teenagers when they met, both outsiders in their own ways. She carried books in her arms like shields, always scribbling ideas and dreams into a tattered notebook. He was the boy who fixed broken things without asking. A library chair, a neighbor's bike, a wounded bird. He never talked much, but she heard him anyway. And then, one winter evening, she had whispered that her family was moving, without warning, without choice. Her eyes had been full of fear, not just of leaving, but of being forgotten. "Promise me," she had said, holding his hand in that frozen courtyard. "Promise me you won't lose that part of you. The quiet part. The kind part." And then, she was gone. For years he carried that promise like a thread stitched into his chest, silent but never broken, until now. Now she was back. The next morning Keanu left early. He didn't take security, didn't alert press. He simply wore that same black hoodie, pulled low over his head, and made his way to the old library steps downtown, the very place they had last stood together. He found her there, sitting alone, with a book in her lap and a small paper bag beside her. She looked older, of course. Time had etched soft lines at the corners of her eyes, but they were still the same, deep, listening, gentle, like they always had been. She didn't speak when he sat down beside her. Neither did he. The silence said enough. After a while, she handed him the bag. "You still like peanut butter cookies?" she asked. He smiled. Always. They ate in quiet. Finally, she turned toward him. I watched the video, the one from the flight. I read the letter. It felt like you were still there, like you never let the noise take you. Keanu looked down at his hands. It almost did. Many times. But it didn't. Only because of moments like that one, he said. When someone needed something small, and I was there. Emily leaned back, staring at the sky. You know what I kept thinking about when I saw the world reacting to you? What? How strange it is that people are surprised by kindness, like it's a miracle, not a choice. He nodded. I think it's because kindness doesn't fight for attention. It just shows up. A long pause. Then Emily pulled something out of her coat pocket, her old notebook. Somehow still intact after all these years. I want to show you something, she said. Inside were sketches, ideas, half-poems and dreams once scribbled by a teenage girl too scared to speak them aloud. But in the center, pressed flat between the pages, was a photo. It was him, younger, smiling, mid-laugh. In the photo, he was handing a sandwich to a homeless man outside a theater. She had taken it without him knowing. You were already this man, she said softly. The world just hadn't noticed yet. His throat tightened, and for a moment he didn't know what to say. Why now? He asked. Why reach out after all these years? Because the world's listening now, she said. And you might be the only one who knows what to say, without yelling. Keanu looked around. The street was waking up. Taxis rolled past. A man fed pigeons nearby. Life was moving, but something else moved inside him too. He had spent years trying to avoid the spotlight, believing that staying humble meant staying hidden. But now he understood. Humility wasn't hiding. It was how you stood when people looked. And maybe he was ready to stand again. Emily, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I want to do something. Something real. She smiled. Then do it. The world is waiting. And far away, a new headline was quietly being prepared. Project no one expected. A ripple about to become a wave, but it wouldn't be announced with a red carpet or flashing lights. It would begin with a single handwritten name on a deed. The building with no name. A month later, a rusted gate creaked open in a forgotten corner of the city. Behind it stood a structure that had once been many things: a shoe factory, a warehouse, a shelter during winters. Over the years it had been left to decay, its windows broken, its walls stained by time. Pigeons had made a home there. So had memories that no one cared to keep, until today. There were no reporters, no music, no grand ribbon, just a small gathering of faces, old, young, wrinkled, bright-eyed, people from neighborhoods that had long been ignored. Standing among them, dressed the same as always, was Keanu Reeves. He wasn't holding a microphone. He wasn't giving a speech. He was simply handing over a set of keys to a boy, not a celebrity, not a politician, just a teenager named Malik. The same boy who'd handed Keanu that pencil drawing on the train weeks ago. The one who'd said, I call it quiet strength. It's yours, Keanu said, placing the keys in his hand. Not just for you, but for everyone like you. Malik's hands trembled. What is this place? Keanu looked up at the building. The sun was beginning to rise behind it, spilling gold across the rooftop like a soft blessing. Whatever it needs to be, he said. A space to rest, to learn, to build, to dream. The crowd slowly stepped forward. Single mothers, ex-veterans, children with tangled hair and bright imaginations. They walked through the doors, their feet echoing on worn floors that would soon be replaced. Laughter bounced off broken beams. Somewhere, a girl found an old piano in the corner and started pressing the keys. Uncertain, but brave. There were no signs outside, no branding, no name, just a quiet place for people who had never been handed a microphone. And in that moment, something became clear, not to the crowd, but to Keanu. This hadn't been about the airline, or the lost first-class seat, or even the $400 million the company had let slip through their fingers. It was about how a small act, unnoticed by most, could shake the world loose from its noise. Because when Keanu sat in seat 36E, cramped and silent, what he really did was show the world that character wasn't defined by what you had, but by what you chose to do when no one expected anything from you. Back at the airline, the aftermath had been severe. Executives were replaced, policies rewritten, mandatory kindness training introduced, though most called it ironic. Their stock price had dipped further than they'd ever imagined. Investors pulled back. Competitors rose. But none of that mattered to Keanu. He didn't fly first class anymore, not because he couldn't, but because he'd learned more about humanity in the back of a plane than he ever had in front of it. And the world? The world changed in small, powerful ways. A school in Denver created a Keanu Day, where students performed anonymous acts of kindness. A prisoner in Sweden wrote a letter saying he'd decided to mentor other inmates after reading the letter. From seat 36E, a group of refugees in Greece named their rebuilt shelter the Quiet House. The ripples spread, not loud, but deep. And Keanu? He kept walking, kept listening, kept showing up where no one expected him. Sometimes he helped fix a leaky roof. Other times, he simply sat beside someone who was lonely. He never asked for recognition. He only hoped that if people remembered anything about the story, it wouldn't be the seat or the scandal. It would be the idea that kindness doesn't need an audience. Just a choice. One quiet choice, made again and again and again. A year later, Malik stood at the front of the same building. It had grown. New paint, new windows, bookshelves filled with stories in 20 languages. The walls were covered with art. Music drifted from upstairs. It was alive. Someone asked him, "What's this place called?" Malik looked up at the hand-painted plaque now nailed above the door. He smiled, the building with no name. And somewhere, Keanu Reeves stood in a crowd, watching from a distance. Just a quiet man, hands in his pockets, disappearing once again. But the world would not forget him, not because he demanded it, but because he didn't.